the last step we need to do is to create a train that will run backwards and forwards between the stations. Stations have names automatically assigned. You can change that. We'll go through that. Something that I like they've added is these platforms that now span the length all the way along. Very, very useful. So to start off with, at the beginning of the station we need a train, and the trains can be rotated, and now the front of the train has to be facing towards the correct location. It doesn't matter where I place it. I'm going to put it, say, here. That's fine. Then I need to place a freight car, and it automatically, you can see here it's not connected, but then it snaps to the train. And then I need to add a second freight car, and then because it's a double-ended, it's a train that goes backwards and forwards, we have to add a train at the end facing the opposite direction. So now we have our train set up, and then we can come to our platform. This is the Hamburg. So if we come in here, we can name our station. We can just call it Station A for something really, complicated. And then we can go to our timetable tab. This is our locomotive, our brand new locomotive we've created. We can give our choo-choo a name. So let's just call it the train, because I need something simple. Then you have to add trains to the timetable. So we're going to add Station A, which is here, and then we're going to add, and when we add a second one, we have to select it, and we can select the name. And it should bounce backwards and forwards between the two. Now, I may have to make another change. I'm not 100% sure. And also, we have to change the. We have to set to be automatic. Once we do that, when we close the window, it becomes automated, and you can see the train pulls up, comes to a stop here. And then because there's nothing to load and unload, it goes to the other location. Now it'll do the same here. The train will come in. Now what I didn't do previously is I didn't configure, that was the load end. I didn't configure this end to be unload. So let's do that. And then what we'll do actually is we will come to this end up here, and I'm going to put some concrete in, and I'll demonstrate how it all works. I can't put a fluid in manually, so I can't demonstrate fluids, but they're the same thing. So I can just use this like a storage container, and I can just put some concrete in there. So now when the train comes back, it should load up, and then it will take it and unload it at the other end. So you can see how this is very simple to set up, but can very quickly get complicated. Like I explained, if you wanted to add another freight platform, the other end has to match this order. And I will discuss alternatives to work around that later. Oh yeah, so that drops. And there's different animations for when the train tops up a carriage and when it drops a container on it. And then we'll see from here, we can see here there's nothing in here anymore. One little neat trick you can do is you can hover on a carriage and see how much is in it. So there's the 300 concrete that's in the carriage, and then here it will do the unload. Now each I'll explain something in a second. Just want to let this finish. So now that the freight car stays empty, if it only topped it up, it would leave it back on there, and there's our 300 concrete. Just something to keep in mind with trains and train stations is the power usages. So a train station has a static draw of 50 megawatts always. So already with this setup, we're drawing 100 megawatts. Each freight platform draws 50 megawatts, but only when there is a operation that occurred, which probably was here and somewhere. It's not a static draw. It's a draw when the operation happens. So if that was loading and unloading both ends each time, that's another 200 megawatts added. So the trains now, this whole train setup is consuming 300 megawatts at, well, it's not at one time, but 200 megawatts at any one time. But also, the trains require between 25 to 110 megawatts of power as well. And this all varies on the angle it has to go up in elevation, how many freight carriages are being carried. You can have multiple engines depending on the length of the train. It gets quite complicated. But to keep it simple though, the key concepts you need to understand is the front of the train always has to be an engine. Now that might seem obvious, but you cannot have freight cars in front of the engine and have stations in front of the engine. They do not make up part of the train, and what happens is the train can't get somewhere because the freight car at the beginning is classed as the beginning of the train, and there is no way for it to move, even though there are engines. You can have, like we've got here, an engine at the end. You can have an engine behind here, you can have an engine in the middle, but the very first car of your train has to be an engine. The only reason we have an engine on the back here is because we're doing a backwards forwards train setup. That's all that is.